Okay, you got your coffee, I see.
It's Dad.
Ah, how sweet.
I know.
That's super
It is.
sweet.
It's my official pop culture coffee hour mug.
Hmm. I have my Be the Bee mug, which I almost slipped.
You slipped?
I almost dropped it out of my hands. I
Oh
moisturized
no.
recently and my hands are a little. Can you hear that?
I don't know why I put my ear to my microphone. As if that's going to help me.
For those who can't see, yes, Christian just put his ear to the microphone to hear the sound, which is
Yep.
old man shakes fist at cloud. That's what that was.
I don't understand these here interwebs.
How's it going?
It's going okay, man. Here we are.
Here we are.
Pop culture quarantine hour.
We're doing it. We're doing it live.
Mm-hmm. From the comfort of anywhere.
Yeah. Why are we doing this thing?
Why are we doing this thing? Well, it's just to kind of help, I think, ease the pain of quarantine. Being stuck in. I've been in this room for many, many hours of the last week and a half, and I sort of feel like, despite all my rage, I'm still just a rat in a cage. It's kind of how I'm feeling. I don't know about
you. Say that with a bit more angst.
Despite all my rage, I am still just a rat in a cage. Yeah, but the whole point, I think, is just to kind of make it just a little bit easier for us, a little bit easier for everybody. But yeah, I'm excited about it.
Totally. And for those that are joining us, we're going to do things a little bit differently today. So if you are familiar with our normal shenanigans, you will probably get more shenanigans at the top of this because none of it will be edited out. It's all just here. Number one. Number two, we normally close with the top five. We're not going to do our top five at the end. Instead, what we'll do is we'll have time for Q&A. So everybody is muted right now, but feel free to use the chat as some people have. Feel free to add questions and comments, and we'll get to that at the end of our normal sort of shenanigan conversation. So get a cup of coffee or tea or water or another beverage of your choice. If you moisturize your hands, make sure that your hands dry off a little bit before you try to pick up your ceramic mug, because that could spell danger. And that's it. Did I miss anything?
No, I don't think so. I think that's pretty much it. Shall we kind of hop on in? Again, feel free to jump in on the chat feature whenever you all want. I think it'll be fun. This is an experiment. It's a good experiment, a quarantine experiment.
It is. There's a lot of
how's it going?
A lot of science that's going on.
Oh my gosh, so much science. we're lousy with science up in here.
So how have you been? We'll start follow up with just kind of what's going on as a human. How are you as a human in your room that is graced by Ron Swanson over your shoulder?
Yes, there he is, looking over me, giving me advice, reminding me all that it is to be a man.
Yes, fish is for sport, never for meat. Remember that.
Yes, exactly. And whenever I have a question, I consult the Pyramid of Greatness, and there's a lot that it offers me. But things are going well. It's been kind of hilarious, like being stuck at home with everybody. Like I constantly just hear all the little like fights and arguments and the little squabbles between the children and all of that kind of stuff. And there's part of me that wants to go out there and be like, you guys need to learn to love each other and stop yelling. But I can't seem to always get myself out there. But how's it going for you, man? How's the quarantine treating you?
Quarantine is going well so far. I find myself on my phone in ways that I didn't expect, right? So like I thought that I would be fasting from social media during Great Lent. Not so much anymore.
Turns out you're feasting.
Yes, I'm feasting on social media. I have never FaceTimed with my mom before because she lives like 5 minutes from me. And now I'm FaceTiming with my mom every day. So it's kind of fun to like get weird angles of my mom's face as we FaceTime with each other. So it's kind of like quarantine is okay. It's weird. It's different. I'm kind of realizing I have maybe more introverted personality traits than I realized. So like part of me is like actually kind of okay with the quiet, although I find myself wasting more time. And maybe that's kind of my own way of processing by avoiding and sort of like Netflix is a thing I will do for the next 7 hours. So I can't say it's totally healthy, but thank God I have remained sane. I have not begun speaking to a volleyball or any other inanimate objects.
What if you were going to speak though to any inanimate object? Like if you were going to choose something to be your best friend in your house, what would it be?
I think that because of I tend to be a social climber, and I think I tend to project as a 3 that level of success. I would pick a roll of toilet paper, which is very much in demand in our society nowadays.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
How about you?
I'd probably pick my daughter's stuffed animal sloth, because it'd just be like, dude, your life seems so great. Like you just kind of hang out, move around slow. How do you do it? Teach me more. Teach me more about your ways. Like that's what I would want to know. You know, how can I be more like you?
Blessed are you, O sloth. Teach me your ways.
Yes. Teach me thy sloth shoots. So what else is going on? I think one of the, something that I think was kind of interesting that we have never been in a situation. And well, I don't know about you, but the last time I went through a global pandemic, things did not go the way that this one is going. So we canceled all of our remaining beach reads for the year. That's kind of a weird place to be.
Yes, that was weird. And that was hard. And that took a lot of thought and a lot of prayer and a lot of back and forth at first, because it's like, well, like my thought process, right, was like, I'm not afraid of this virus. I'm going to go and sort of give people the gospel that they need. And then you sort of think about it for a second and it's like, no, dummy, you're putting everybody at risk. Stop being a dummy. We're going to cancel everything. We're going to socially distance ourselves. We're going to rely on the interwebs, and we're not going to be prideful jerks the way that some of us, I'm pointing at myself for those that can't see on video right now, tend to be prideful jerks. So yeah, that was weird and hard.
Yeah. It's weird. It definitely is weird. I saw this meme, by the way, the other day. It was like Kylo Ren just giving like the thumbs up from like Matt the technician, and it says, "Be more like Kylo Ren. Wears a mask, wears gloves, Skypes with his girlfriend, maintains social distance." Things like that. I was like, that's amazing.
We have to reconcile that with the fact that Matt straight up sucks, though. So
yeah, that's true. I'm 99% sure that Matt is Kylo Ren. But yeah, I mean, as a result of it, I think what's kind of interesting is that I do feel like, on the other hand, it's kind of put us into high gear in terms of trying to think like creatively about like how is this maybe an opportunity to up the ante with like online ministry stuff, which has been kind of cool,
Yeah, totally.
As an opportunity.
Totally. And I think the great thing about it is the way that people are really coming together to do this, right? The way that it's really this like pan-Orthodox thing, because it's not just like us doing stuff. I mean,
right.
We put out an update video not too long ago on our YouTube channel, and we set up this website, Y2M.org/@home, which has all these sort of like daily streaming things, right? But it's OCF, Orthodox Christian Fellowship, and it's Youth Equipped to Serve, and it's Ancient Faith Ministries, and it's the different jurisdictions, and it's like volunteers in some of the dioceses, like our friends in Dawama in the Antiochian Archdiocese specifically. And there's just so many people who are like lending their time and their talent, right, to all of this, which is fantastic. And it's amazing, because for me, the really heartening thing is like, as difficult as it is, people are seeing this as like a call to action and a call to minister to their sort of brothers and sisters and not leave them in the lurch, which is why one of the reasons why we transitioned pop culture to like a live thing now instead of a pre-recorded thing, so we can be silly together.
Yep.
Hi, Uncle Steve, I see in the chat. Yes, that's me, Uncle Steve. It's an old Dawama joke.
I feel so included.
But like, I don't know, it's for me, it's really heartening that people are stepping up and doing this. And so if you want to sort of see what's going on, I'll actually put these two things in the chat as well so you can see it. If you go to y2am.org/@home, which I typed into the chat right now, that is like all the stuff that is happening right now, like live stuff during the day, videos and podcasts and whatever that are happening, like Bible studies that we're doing, silence workshops that we're doing. OCF is doing these like cooking things. People are submitting sing-alongs. It's amazing. Lots of stuff happening. And if you want to just get it on your phone, if you go to y2am.org/calendar, it'll take you directly to this Google Cal that you can get on your phone, and you can simply like have all your stuff pop up on the phone. So, you know, you want to see the guys be silly on Pop Culture Coffee Hour, boom, notification. It's there. Bing, notification.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's been a cool thing, I think, to be able to team up with people. And there's just so many good humans that are wanting to do good work and who care so deeply about the church. So I increasingly feel like honored to be. It's kind of a funny thing that it took something like the social distancing of a pandemic to bring us all together at an ecclesial level.
Right.
Because now it's like, hey, let's stop. Like we're all going to get sick. We're all quarantined. Like, let's just stay inside and figure out how to work out together. Let's do this. It's pretty cool, actually. But other than that, even internally, you know, obviously we're still going with Pop Culture Coffee Hour, still going with our other podcasts, Wandering the Desert and We Are Orthodoxy. And so we're trying to kind of keep up with business as usual because, just because COVID is out there, it's not going to keep us down. No.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
I got bronchitis.
Actually, at this point, hopefully it is bronchitis, right?
Right.
A thing that I'll say about all the online stuff, right? So this is something that we've been brainstorming a little bit as well. Like I think it's really cool that everybody is stepping up and we have a lot of these central things happening, but I think there has to be some of our kind of brainstorming and our vision for this. Like there has to be sort of this connection with, you know, like the church and the ministry organizations and whatever it is, that's kind of a vertical connection. But I think this also might be an opportunity for horizontal connection as well. Because one of the things that I've realized, like we were talking about this the other day, Christian, like when you log into a live stream of a service or whatever it is, there's so many people in the chat who are like, hey, it's Steve from New York, you know, watching. And there seems to be this real like desire to connect. And that's hard when there's 30 or 40 or whatever people in a Zoom room, right? So one thing we're working on is giving parishes a little bit of guidance to break people up into smaller groups. So instead of getting lost in this, 30, 40 people in a chat, like what if we got together every week as just 6 or 7 or 8 and could look each other in the face virtually and, everybody had a chance to be seen and heard. So it's not just like connecting with the central ministries or anything, but connecting with each other as Christians. And, this is kind of like classically more of a Protestant model of breaking up people into small groups, right? But there are a few Orthodox parishes across the United States who've been trying this, and it's great. And so we've reached out to some of them. We're putting together these materials. I'm going to put the link in the chat as well, y2am.org/small groups. That will hopefully, maybe before the end of the day, actually, we'll have some like checklists and guides and some training opportunities for small group leaders. So that's some stuff that's on the way.
I will contend with you a little bit on the Protestant model thing, because I seem to know and remember a certain Lord God and Savior who had a small group of about 12, and an even smaller group of about 3. So
yes, that's the irony, right? Like we as Orthodox can somehow dismiss these things, but come on.
Yeah, come on.
Come on, guys, come on.
Bing. What else we got going?
So since we're on the subject of ministry, following up, we do have this course, Effective Christian Ministry, that we put out a few months ago now. Time is working in a very weird, I don't know if we have left, Chronos and we're now in Kairos, but things are really different right now.
Either way, it feels like we're stuck in the same day kind of over and over again right now, doesn't it?
Yes. ... he says with a knowing arch of the eyebrow, which I can't actually do with my face muscles. But we have Effective Christian Ministry out, and there's like 400 people in the course. And because some people have more time on their hands and they may want to try to have some educational opportunities for themselves, if you go to effectivechristianministry.org, which I'm going to type in the chat as well, ministry.org, we're doing a 50% off code to register. So if you when you register for the course, Pop Culture 50, I'm typing that in as well. I misspelled culture 50. you'll get 50%. So it's a way to just get in and do some education, do some personal development, and just kind of like step up your ministry game and challenge yourself and hopefully kind of work through some interesting things. So we're both really proud of the course, and it's helping a lot of people. The feedback's been great. So if you've got some time on your hands, make use of the code.
Do it. And at this point too, I just want to make like a quick promotion since, this is Pop Culture Coffee Hour. And since we're all stuck inside, our ability to go to the store is relatively limited. And my guess is if you're anything like me, you probably find yourself running out of coffee even more quickly these days. That's why I want to do a little bit of a promotion for a local coffee shop here in Phoenix that is actually a small business that's led by faithful Orthodox Christians who go to my church. And like many other small businesses these days, they are taking a major hit from all of the, shut in and stuff like that. Everyone who is working for them right now is working there on a strictly volunteer basis, because they just love the owners so much and they love the community that they've built. So obviously they're very good people to still be getting people volunteering their time. And so that business here is called Cartel Coffee Lab. They are in the middle of doing a free delivery to your home. I'll put the link in the ad here too. But they make some of the best coffee in Phoenix, perhaps even the best coffee. And Steve and I have recently decided that Cartel Coffee is the official coffee of Pop Culture Coffee Hour. They're not like our sponsors or anything like that, but if you want to be like us, if you want, it's very important for all of you, I'm sure. Then I would head over to cartelcoffeelab.com and order some stuff from their online store with the promo code Stay Home. They just make awesome coffee, and it's I think a really great way to support these faithful Orthodox Christians who are on the brink of some troubles with their business.
Yes. And again, just to be clear, like it's not a paid sponsorship or anything like that. It's just coffee that we both enjoy. I got 4 bags the other day myself. Am I going to use all those 4 bags immediately? No, but there's a lot of small businesses out there that need support right now. So if you're not interested in coffee, if there's a local coffee shop that you want to patronize, definitely go for it. I think if to the extent you can, right? Like there's a tea place here in Astoria in New York that I've tried to buy a couple of bags of tea for friends. Like these are hard times, and our dollars can make a difference potentially with some of the businesses out there that are really being hit up. These small family-owned businesses. In the case of Cartel, just like really faithful people too, who built something over the course of the past decade plus. So yeah, thank you Christian for bringing that up. And it's good coffee.
So good.
It's good coffee. So I think that's kind of the end of follow-up except for one thing. So I think one thing that it might be helpful to do, we're not doing our top 5, like we said. At the end, we'll do kind of questions, kind of monitoring the chat. But I thought it might be helpful just to sort of start each episode with one thing we're each grateful for, because these can be sort of crazy times. And so I think it's helpful to just kind of start with that. Do you want to start, Christian? Should I? Do you have something that you're grateful for?
Sure. Yeah, actually, I think one of the things that I've been feeling really grateful for, especially today, is my wife. Like she is tending 3 children while I'm trying to work. Normally we have one of the kids in school, and there's just other things to do, but she's just like stuck inside with 3 small children. While I'm, trying to do my work and stuff. And she's just been so good and so awesome at taking care of all this stuff that I don't feel like I have to worry too much beyond the level of just my own distractibility, like when I hear the kids or whatever. But I've been really grateful for just like how under control everything seems. Like this could be a time, I think, for chaos. But it doesn't feel like things are chaotic. Like there's like the schedule for how the day rolls out, and it's just been great. So I'm really grateful.
Totally. Totally. Good person. Good human your wife is. Shout out to Michaela. whose name I think might actually be appearing on your as your little chat icon.
I know, because she created a Zoom account to keep up with people, and for some reason now it's my Zoom account. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
Hello, you can call me.
Just to be
Michaela.
clear, Michaela Gonzalez is not thanking himself. Christian Gonzalez is thanking.
Let the record show.
Yeah.
Keep it in minutes.
Totally. I had my gavel handy. And the thing that I'll say is I've been grateful for the outdoors. A lot of time obviously spent indoors. It's nice. It's been nice. The weather's been pretty nice here in New York. It's been nice to take a walk, half an hour, whatever it is, like obeying social distancing, crossing the street when I need to, avoiding people who are still congregating out there, which is kind of frustrating. But it's kind of nice that the sun is still shining and the flowers are still blossoming and spring is still in the air. And God is still on his throne. And it's kind of nice to see like life percolating outside. It's just sort of a reminder of that. And it's kind of nice just to sort of take a moment, look at the trees, look at the clouds, take a deep breath, and just sort of remember that he's here and his kingdom is still at hand. So
True that.
That's what I'm grateful for.
That's awesome. I'm glad that you guys are getting to be able to go outside and do some stuff out there instead of being stuck fully inside. Like I was feeling so bad for you people in New York with your apartments. Like at least we have a backyard out here, you know?
Yeah.
We can go like put our feet in the grass and stuff.
Yeah. And admittedly, I live in a relatively quiet part of Queens, so it's kind of easy. Like I can exit and there's not a crowd of people, which is nice. Otherwise I might be thinking twice about it. So yeah, quiet streets, it's helpful. Well, I think that's it for follow-up.
I think so.
So people have been asking in the chat, what are we doing this week in this first, not first ever, but first ever live remote Zoom version of Pop Culture Coffee Hour?
Well, because of the level of quarantine and the fact that so many of us are stuck inside, feeling like we're doing the same thing every day, not going anywhere, it feels like we're just living the same day over and 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 over again. We are going to do Groundhog Day.
Yes.
Because it is somewhat of a Groundhog Day, isn't it?
Hopefully we are all taking this
moment. Put your little hand in mine. No!
Yes, hopefully we're all using this time to learn Italian or French and piano.
Exactly.
So Despina in the chat had a question, is there going to be a spoiler boing? Two answers to that. One, as you might recall, we have retired the spoiler boing because it was deemed inappropriate by some, prurient, some even feared. So it was replaced with the spoiler porg, even though whatever, I disagree with that. I think the spoiler boing is wholesome in its own way. Number one. Number two, this is an old movie, right? Groundhog Day came out in the 80s, right?
93?
93?
I'm taking a stab in the dark right now. I'm going to look it up for you.
Okay, the almost 80s.
Yep, 93.
What a mensch you are. Look at you.
Look at that. Truly just a reservoir of pop culture knowledge. You're lucky to be my friend. You are so lucky to be my friend.
I totally am.
Yeah. You're welcome.
So 93, while we can quibble about the precise statute of limitations for pop culture spoilers, I think we can all agree that Groundhog Day has exceeded the statute of limitations. So we are not going to invoke the spoiler porg. We are going to plow ahead, backs against the current, Gatsby reference, whatever it is, and just kind of get into it.
Oh, no. Oh, whoops. Oh, I don't know how that happened. My porg got loose.
You disobedient so-and-so.
Dude, it's not my fault. It's the disobedient porg.
Insubordinate and churlish. That's what that is.
Insubordinate. Those silly porks.
It was. None of it's getting it out. It's all here.
Yep. Now you know. Now you know how it goes.
So, how do we get started? Should I do a little summary at first?
Yeah, do it.
Okay. So Groundhog Day takes place in Pennsylvania. There is a weatherman played by Bill Murray, who's kind of this hotshot guy that wants to make it into the big network, but he keeps getting stuck with these like minor little assignments. He gets stuck covering the Groundhog Day celebrations with what's his name, Phil, Punxsutawney Phil. And he's kind of a self-entitled, arrogant jerk. And something happens, right? And he finds himself being mean to everybody in this small town, and he can't get back home. And he wakes up the following morning, still stuck in this small town. And he is horrified to realize that it actually is once again February 2nd, Groundhog Day. And he wakes up the following day and realizes once again, it is still February 2nd, Groundhog Day. He wakes up to the same alarm, the same live, radio broadcast, whatever it is. And it is this interesting example of this guy who is like stuck in this infinite loop, who really grows and matures as a human being. And he starts as kind of an arrogant jerk, and it ends with him actually sort of falling in love with somebody, having that person fall in love with him as well. And his character is really healed and redeemed through the course of this infinite just progression of like lather, rinse, repeat, February 2nd. I will say there's like people I think on Reddit who tried to calculate how long Bill Murray would have had to be stuck on February 2nd for this to like work in terms of learning piano and all that sort of stuff. It would have been like years. It would have been years and years and years. It was a long excursion into some sort of weird like space-time continuum loop. But that's it in a nutshell. Did I miss anything?
No, nailed it. How was it going? When was the last time you watched it before you watched it, again for this time?
Back in those halcyon days pre-quarantine.
Remember that when we could walk into our local grocery store? Those were the days.
But years. It's probably been at least like 10 years. I think it's been a while. So, I was glad to revisit it. But what did you think about what do you think about the movie?
Oh man, I love this movie. This is one of my favorite movies for sure. It's hilarious. It's beautiful. I think it shows the spiritual journey in a really good way. This is a movie that I probably revisit every year or two anyway, just because I love it. And for me, it kind of goes like hand in hand with What About Bob, which is another one of my favorite movies, which my wife and I just watched like last weekend. And so I was like, oh man, we got to watch Groundhog Day. And so it worked out perfectly that we decided to do it for this as well. So I was happy.
Super cool.
Yeah. How about you?
Super cool. I'm a big Bill Murray fan. I mean, who isn't at this point, right? And this is one of his just more classic movies. And I think like the timing is great in terms of where we are. I think the timing is also great because I couldn't help but watch the movie with echoes of The Good Place in my mind as well, because it's again a similar sort of exploration of growth, right? So it's really interesting, like anthropology and almost theology, right? But it's really beautifully done. And I think the movie still holds up after all these years, 30 years later or whatever the heck it is. It's really fun. It's really sweet. It's definitely worth a watch. And I'm glad that we're doing this again. Yeah,
me too. So I guess where maybe I would want to start with this, and I don't know like what you thought about this, because there's not necessarily like a transcendent being that he seems to encounter at any point, that Phil Connors seems to encounter. At least not like in the sense of like Bruce Almighty, right? Like in Bruce Almighty, like Jim Carrey's character who's horrible and hates God actually meets God. And I can't believe we've never done Bruce Almighty. We should totally do Bruce Almighty. Anyway, we see him actually meet God, and God has this interaction relationship with him. But in this one, it just kind of starts happening to Phil. But to me, there still seems to be some level of transcendent intervention, especially like as the viewer. I find myself kind of wondering how this is happening. Like, how has he ended up in this time warp or like this loop of time? It doesn't seem like Phil ever really questions that himself, like how this happened. It's much more about like, why is this happening and what can I get out of it? But for me, I really can't help but look at it from really like, through the lens of cosmology. Like what is the cosmos? What is the universal structure that this takes place in? Someone must be having a hand in it, because he clearly keeps failing the test and over, and eventually he passes it by some criteria. So there must be a judge somewhere. Someone must be judging something somehow.
Yeah, totally. And I think that comes through after the ending, right? Because like in the midst of this, it totally seems capricious. It totally seems like there's some sort of glitch in the matrix, right? But I think like, because again, we get no overt clues that there is some sort of like purpose, but like something happens, and it's like he clears this bar, or he passes this test, or however you want to phrase it, right? Like we can sort of like interpret or sort of read some level of like design into this, right? That there is some level of like goodness at play, that there is something or someone, whatever it is, whether it's abstract like the force or some sort of like divine being, right? Like something seems like he or it or whatever wanted, Bill Murray's character. I keep forgetting his character name. Phil Duffo.
Just the same name as the Groundhog.
The Groundhog. Yeah.
Yeah. Once upon a Phil.
That's right. Like something or someone wants him to be different. And that's the thing. Like, had this been just like infinite, right? And had nothing he done had any sort of agency, right? No matter how bad he got, no matter how good he got, like that would feel wicked. Like that would feel right if he was literally just kind of like stuck in this loop for all of eternity with no way out. But like there was something at play. And is that us reading into it as viewers? Is that us just sort of like understanding the context of this and realizing like this is sometimes how God manifests himself, right? Sort of in retrospect. In the midst of this, we might not know, but in retrospect, which is the way that we understand things frequently at Christians, we understand the Old Testament sort of in retrospect, right? We understand things in our lives in retrospect, and we're kind of understanding even this cosmological like level to Groundhog Day in retrospect.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole, I mean, really like what you're speaking to, I think has always been one of the most interesting parts of like the Luke 24 story of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, right? Like Jesus is walking with them and they have no idea that it's him. And then only when their eyes are open and they see him in Emmaus and he finally disappears from sight, are they like, oh, dang, like, like, didn't you like, we knew it was him the whole time, right? Like now it makes sense. Like our hearts were on fire, dude. Like, did you know? I kind of knew, but like now I really know.
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of how that plays out for, like you're saying, a lot of our lives. Like Soren Kierkegaard has this great quote where he says, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. And that to me is a really powerful thing. I think even to keep in mind right now, right? Like we're all kind of stuck in quarantine and we're willingly in quarantine. I mean, we could walk out the door and go be, just irresponsible with the people around us, right? And touch everything and cough on everyone and et cetera, et cetera. But I think the hope is that, 2 months from now, 3 months from now, whatever, we'll look back at this and be like, dude, it was such a good thing that we all stayed inside, even though at the time we all felt like, what's all this for? Like, like what a struggle. I don't know anybody who's got it. You don't know anybody who's got it. Like that kind of, stuff can only be taken by faith as we go. But yeah, I mean, I think that what you're saying here is important because there is something clearly that like has a vested interest in Phil, right? Like that someone cares about something that happens with him. For some reason, I don't know why it had never really occurred to me until, I watched it like this last time, was that even though Phil is reliving the same day and has some kind of awareness of this, everyone else is just living the same day totally on repeat. And so like I mean, I'm not sure what to make of that because it doesn't seem like anybody else is really affected by it in the same way that Phil is. But there's something that's important happening just for him. And that kind of brought into perspective for me, like, where Jesus tells the parable of the good shepherd who leaves the 99 and goes to find the one that is lost. Where like this becomes all about the salvation and the sanctification of just one man, right?
Yeah. And it kind of shows like the depths to which the shepherd will go and seek after his sheep, right? Because if you think of the mechanics of this, the constant rewind, right? Like, I mean, literally the whole universe is standing still for the sake of Phil. Presumably astronomers that are out there, like looking at where the moon is and Mars is and where the stars are in the night sky, like they're all in the places that they should be normally because things are just kind of like paused at 6 a.m. and then they get rewound exactly 24 hours. And the whole thing is just like, nope, reset. But the great thing about it too, though, is that even though this is sort of done ostensibly for one man, like the whole world benefits. right? I mean, Rita
Right.
sort of benefits because her life is transformed because she has this loving connection with somebody. The sort of the background characters, right? There was the couple that were like, the girl had doubts about getting married, right? And we see them at the end that they come forward like having been married, and there's all these people whose lives have been touched positively by Phil, the good man who develops after these thousands of years or whatever the heck it takes, right? Which again is like that sort of Saint Seraphim thing, that if you acquire peace, thousands around you will be saved. And like the world is different because Phil has acquired the spirit of peace finally after all of the struggle.
Yeah, no, that's really, I think that's really beautiful and true. Like eventually, when the judgment is kind of resolved, when he is able to move on, right? Like there's some level of like availability to other people that he now has, right? He begins, this whole show is like this, or the whole movie is this really just like self-involved. Larry at one point calls him a prima donna. And like that's exactly what he is. Like he's the first lady of the show, and like that's exactly how he plays out. But then finally he begins to realize that there's a bunch of people around him that need to be attended to as actual persons.
Which I think is it's embodied and it's crystallized so well. When he realizes that he wakes up on the morning of February 3rd. Right. And he rolls over in bed and he sees Rita there. And it's not like, I have finally escaped. It's not this sort of like personal exaltation. Like the last thing out of his mouth before the scene cuts is, what can I do for you today?
You can't even say it. It makes me cry.
Right.
Like, yeah. I mean, it's like, it's so beautiful because now he's like finally free. Right. And he's not free to like go back to being a jerk, but he's now like, he's just excited to have a new day to serve her. Like it's really, it was so beautiful. I mean, there definitely are a couple moments where, like, man, they just like the movie is so moving to me. Like that line is one of them. And then the scene where he's like trying to save the old man from dying.
Oh yeah. Again and
like,
again and
again and again and again, trying to do all he can. And he realizes like not everybody can be saved, which is like I think a really powerful and humble thing too, that keeps him from really believing that he's a god. Like if he could save and make everybody all great and grand and wonderful all the time, then he might run into some of the delusion of thinking that he is a god and that he can, help everybody and save everybody, but he just can't. And there's only things that there's only some things that he can do and some things that he can't. But what I loved too, and where I really began to see the shift this time, even in that scene, was how Phil spoke to this guy. Like he kept calling him things like father, dad, pop, like all these really like relational terms that, for him were kind of new to his mouth, right? Like everyone that he meets. And I think this is what's so interesting about even the way that his time in Groundhog Day begins, right? Like for him, the world and people are objects, and everything is there for no other reason than to bring him some kind of pleasure, right? To bring him some kind of satisfaction. And I think that's really where most of us begin, like the spiritual life, right? Is like with this attachment to pleasure and to things that make us feel good,
Yeah. Or at the very least ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like Father John Bear will talk about this, as kind of like the grand arc of sort of human life. Like when we are born and the first sounds that we make are sort of inherently self-centered sounds. Like I am hungry, I am wet, take care of me, attend to my every need, right? Like we're sort of born self-centered, and the challenge of the spiritual life, the challenge of human existence is to sort of move from living for the sake of ourselves to moving for the sake of others. And we really see like his movement through the spiritual life as we go through these, hour and a half or whatever it is. So maybe it's worth kind of like highlighting some of those stages, because those are stages that we probably all struggle with ourselves. We probably find ourselves in one of those stages right now as we're all kind of like struggling with our own attempt at holiness, especially with all of the difficulties that are going on out there. So that's where he starts, right? He starts with like being this passionate, right? Not in the sense of lust for life, but just kind of like, I want this and I'm going to get it, right? Everything exists for me. His greatest ambition is to get out of his current gig and make it to the big time with the big network, right? It's about his career, his social standing, his success. And that is burst at the very beginning, of course, because he can't get back home from the blizzard, and he finds himself stuck not only in the same day, but also like in a place that he doesn't want to be. I mean, like the whole situation is literally the exact opposite of anything he would choose for himself.
Yeah, it's like literally his worst nightmare, to be stuck in Punxsutawney. That is not at all what he wants. But what he begins to realize, right, is that like I could do whatever I want and there'd be no consequences. And so he throws himself headlong into whatever passion he wants, right? Like whether it's the just driving crazy and some of the excitement that comes from that, or there's that scene where he's eating everything on the menu at the cafe. And he's like, I don't even have to floss anymore, right? Like everything.
The scene of him stuffing the slice of cake into his mouth while just maintaining eye contact with Rita is just fantastic. Just wedges it in there.
Yeah. He's got like the little frosting still stuck on the side. He just doesn't wipe it away at all. He just doesn't care at all. Yeah, no, it's pretty hilarious. And he does whatever he wants, right? Like he kind of pursues that woman Nancy and totally manipulates her just to like, have like a night of pleasure and like all of this kind of stuff. And he tries to play the same game, and it works pretty okay for him until like there's something that he gets to the thing that he really wants, right? He's so attached to his desires that what he really wants is to seduce Rita, who is just like the most pure-hearted, like, sweet character in the movie, who's definitely a 9 on the Enneagram for sure. Sure, a 9 on the 9. Yeah, exactly. Definitely a 9. I forget exactly what made me think that, but I was like, oh yeah, she's a 9. But he has, he pursues everything as objects. And what he realizes is that he can't just use her as an object. And he tries to figure that out, but it always ends in him getting slapped, her leaving, right? There's like that great little montage of, I mean, I didn't count how many times he gets slapped, but it's for sure at least like a couple hands full, right? Like that's,
oh yeah,
for sure. It's like boom, 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 boom.
Literal handful. Yeah.
Waka waka.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Bing!
Bing! Ned? Needle nose Ned! Oh man,
I love that he takes his hat off to be like, oh, in case you can't recognize me with the hat off.
Exactly. Yeah. But with Rita, there's what happens, right, is he finally realizes that he's confronted with a person who just can't be manipulated and used, but rather a person who, he tries to even tell her that he loves her at one point. And she's like, love me? You don't even know me, right? Yeah. Like, how can you love me if you don't know me? And that's where he's confronted, I think, for the first time with personhood in the movie, where he butts up against it and realizes that a person is not an object. And this is a person who won't be used as an object. Like, she won't let herself be an object, which is, I think, really powerful for him. And that's where finally, everything that he wants it gets frustrated, and like the system kind of collapses on itself, which I think, to me, I've actually been thinking a lot about frustration lately, because I think with quarantine happening, like, it is something that feels very familiar to me right now. Like, where, I get frustrated by like not being able to go into the store, or like not being able just to go out and buy whatever I want. Or like, even when the quarantine first kind of started, I was like, wait a minute, you mean I have to cancel all my things? I have to say no to social outings, and I can just stay home with all of my books and my Netflix account and stock up on food? I'm like, this is like a dream. Right? But I didn't count the men, and like, I miscounted the men. And like now, I realize, oh, dang, wait a minute. So now I'm stuck here with little people that are always around, always. And they don't go to school. They're stuck in the house too. Everyone is around everyone all the time. And so all of my precious reading time, all of my precious, whatever time is like gone. And so now what started out as like, oh, this is going to be amazing, kind of like how Phil, was like, I can do whatever I want. Now I'm frustrated by like, oh, wait a minute. I don't mean frustrated, like, ugh, these kids. It's just like what I want has been like compromised, right? Like something stands between me and what I want. And that is where frustration enters, when I can't get what I want. And our attachment to that thing becomes, I think, really unhealthy to that degree, right? Like that, I think that's frustration actually. Sorry, I'm kind of trying to figure out what I think here. I think frustration itself begins to reveal to us, what our attachments are. And I've had this.
We're frustrated by the loss of those things because we're attached to those things. Yeah.
Right. When we can't have them, we become frustrated. And I think that we often think of attachments just in like material terms, like we're attached to food or attached to stuff or attached to whatever. But I think that that's really unhelpful, because I think many of us would probably be like, well, I'm not attached to my things. Like, you want a thing? Here, have my thing. But there is probably a certain image of myself that I'm attached to, a certain emotional state that I'm attached to, whatever it might be. And if I can't get that, then it causes me anxiety. It causes me frustration. Like people who are like hell bent on being happy all the time, right? And when they're around sad people, for example, they're like, oh my gosh, like why, like right? Like why does this? Like they're attached to positive emotions or whatever. Like let's avoid all the pain of life. Or for me, it's like that quiet, that peace, that stability. Like that's something that I think I'm unhealthily attached to. Is now when it's like things are happening all over the place, like I find myself kind of internally getting ramped up, and that's not the Lord. Like that's not good.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I get that. And like, I think it's difficult to sort of come to terms with that. And it's difficult to name that sometimes, right? Like that's kind of your situation, my situation here, like I'm by myself, don't have anybody here in the house with that same level of whatever. Like I'm realizing, I think I've known this for a while, but I'm still realizing that it's there. Like my attachment is to like productivity, and my attachment is to sort of getting things done. And so like, I was supposed to be on vacation last week, and I totally did not go on vacation last week. And I've been grumpy about like my own sort of perceived judgment of like, oh, the church is not sort of working fast enough about this, or like people are making the wrong decisions or whatever it is. Like there's a lot of like my frustration is sort of manifesting in like judgment and condemnation and just sort of like outward sort of finger pointing, which is totally not helpful and totally not within like the spirit of Lent, and totally not within just, again, the inner sort of like repentance of the Christian life. Because that's my kind of attachment to success, to productivity. That's my kind of threeness, right? The Enneagram stuff that we have. But this is potentially like one of the, like at some point you have to realize that, right? And if nothing else, like one of the things that I've had some friends mention, if nothing else, this is kind of like a period of imposed quiet, right? It's kind of a period of like imposed reflection. And, it's kind of like a Lenten journey on steroids potentially, because like all of that stuff is now going to percolate to the surface in ways that it otherwise might not. Like, like that kind of frustration for me is not going to percolate to the surface if things are sort of running smoothly on a macro level. Like your frustrations are not going to percolate to the surface if like the normal sort of work schedule is normal, right? But like, man, that period of quiet makes you sort of realize like, oh, there I am.
Well, and I think that like so much of like, a lot of the way that I feel like, I don't think it's a coincidence that all of this is happening during Lent. Like I really don't. I feel like there's definitely something in it from the Lord. And I sort of feel like in the same way that, Phil is kind of sent to quarantine for himself, that this quarantine for each of us probably has something in it that is going to be in a different way difficult for each, right? That's going to make us confront our own attachments and our own idols and our own passions. Like for me, like, there's a lot, I think, where I like to escape, right? I like to escape, and I have no problem with I'm the kind of person who could sit and stare at a wall for forever, and like it would be fine, because like I'm somewhere else and I'm just like numbed out and kind of like dissociated and wherever. Like I'm just somewhere else in the universe, right? But in this case, I have nowhere to escape. Like I have nowhere to go. And for me, I wonder if like maybe the cross here is to like let that part of me die so that I can learn to stay engaged, right? Because like I have to be engaged with my family. Like I can't just be like, well, I'm going to go to whatever and like you know, get out of here so that I don't ever have to feel frustrated. But now it's like I realize that I have to like stay here and stay present and I can't be too attached to just wanting the quiet and wanting the whatever. Because for me, like you're saying, like this is a time of quiet. This is not a time of quiet in our home. I have 3 very loud daughters. They're all very, very adorable, and I like them all very, very much. But they are all very loud, as you can attest. My children are loud, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah. Well, they're kids.
Yes, and they're my kids.
Yeah.
And my kids. Very loud. And I love them. But the amount of times that you have to be like, okay, like let's just turn it down. Like you guys are at like a 11. Let's just bring it down to maybe like 7. 7, and their 7 is still like everybody else's 11. So like it's fine, right? It's fine. We're all happy. Everybody loves each other. We're good. Everyone's hugging all the time. So much joy. Only joy. Never anything.
But this becomes kind of like an interesting sort of just principle of the Christian life and kind of the spiritual struggle. Yeah. Like whatever situation in which we find ourselves is not kind of an obstacle towards our holiness or sanctification. It's kind of like the arena of our holiness, right? Like the noise, right, is not kind of an obstacle towards your peace. It's kind of like the path along which you will find peace. And my sort of quiet, on the other hand, and my kind of like whatever wrestling with some of the macro stuff is not kind of an obstacle. Right? It's not about pointing the finger outward. It's like, this is the condition in which I have to sort of be aware of what is happening.
Right.
And I think like that is one, I think the I don't know, maybe sort of speaking candidly, right? That's one of the things that can be so hard about like actually being a Christian, to own up to these things and not to sort of see like, things would be better if I lived in a different household, or things would be better if I lived in a different place, or things would be better if I had a different job or whatever it is, right? Like, no. Be slow to leave where you are planted, right? The sort of St. Anthony and Father Tom Hopko has that kind of a riff on that in one of his maxims, right? Because this is the sort of like these are the conditions for your holiness, in the same way that Phil's like Puxatawny, right, didn't become an obstacle towards Phil becoming Phil. It was the sort of place where some force, right, put Phil so he could become Phil.
Right. Yeah. And I wonder like what does, and I think this is what's going to be interesting to find out, is like how our time in this like really does become a crucible for us, instead of kind of like I don't know, something to complain about, because I feel like I've seen a lot of complaining on the interwebs about, I don't know, things being shut down and churches being shut down. And I don't know, man, whenever I see complaint and frustration, like my mind goes quickly to attachment. Like this is like I just have a hard time, I think, in some ways, and like I don't know, I wonder about like what would what Jesus would be doing in quarantine. Like would he be worried about his rights? I have a hard time imagining being, but it's my right to go to the temple. And it's like, it's my right to be there. Like my right as an American. Like I just have a hard time imagining, and maybe it is, but just like that attitude from Jesus. Like I have a hard time imagining, and maybe I'm wrong, but like there's like a certain kind of like entitlement, or I don't know, man. Like I don't know what else to call it besides kind of that, like, I'm entitled to my religious rights and all of that kind of stuff.
Well, here's a thought that I think we've riffed on sort of offline, right? I don't know if we've actually talked about this on the podcast before, but I think one of the challenges that the church faces is this sort of tension between, ethnic, cultural, and Christian, right? And like the easy way of looking at it is today is March 25th, right? And today is the Annunciation of the Theotokos. And you're going to have a lot of people and even leaders sort of like giving more highlighting to Greek Independence Day than whatever. So we can sort of externalize it, right? Like it's cultural because it's Greek and Russian and Lebanese and whatever versus Christian. But I think like the real challenge that we're going to have as Christians today in the United States, it's like those kind of like, those are also cultural preconditions, right? Like my Americanness, when it butts up against my Christianity, like, right, which kingdom do I prefer at the end of the day? Do I prefer like the red, white, and blue, or do I prefer the cross? And there are times I think, and it's hard, right? Like that is a thing that we have to sort of contend with too. And it's kind of like the church has to be in a particular place. Like the church has to sort of dialogue with American culture, but we also can't be like guided by it, overrun by it. And I wonder in situations like this, where we sort of prioritize our political sensibilities, or kind of the, you know, the Lone Ranger homesteading, right? The sort of, you know, like these classic sort of American ideals, like to what extent do they play when we're talking about the church, and we're talking about sort of grinding your will down, and we're talking about like obedience, and we're talking about love and
right. Yeah. Obedience and humility, right? Like that, like that's what I think one of the hard things, and that really is like the path for Phil, right, is the path of humility, the path of detachment, which like ultimately is the only way to kind of, I think, rid the soul of some of the despair and the despondency that it feels. Because despair and despondency for him, and I think for us in all of this, is like based in our attachment to things and our inability to get them. And so the path, I think, has to be about this kind of like freedom from attachments, freedom from the passions, but not in this way of like, just make yourself a really good person. Like I think when we think of like apatheia or like passionlessness, we try to think of it almost as just like, well, if I never do anything wrong, then like I'll somehow have attained to the right, the place or whatever. But you can do the right thing the wrong way, right? Like you can do the right thing for the wrong reasons, which isn't to say that you shouldn't do the right thing. You should always do the right thing. And the hope being that you will be made into the right kind of person, right? Not that you'll just be the continent man, but the virtuous man, that like you actually will be filled with being the kind of person who does good things rather than, you know, doing good things. I don't know if I'm making any sense. But like, I think that like, what's interesting for Phil is that for him, he begins to really live as if none of it really matters, because in some sense, none of it really does matter. On the one hand, that's the thing that leads to his despondency, right? Believing that nothing matters. But what leads to his dispassion is believing kind of that ultimately nothing matters, right? Like the money doesn't matter, the whatever doesn't matter, but what matters is the persons that he sees. Like, and there's this big shift, I think, when you see that he starts counting out the money to give to that old man, that old homeless man.
Yeah.
And he starts counting out a couple dollar bills, and then he just gives him the whole wad of cash that he had in his pocket, right? He just like totally gives everything away. And he goes to the piano lady and says like, I'll give you $1,000. And then he buys all of the insurance from Ned. And like, what's amazing to me is he doesn't wake up the next morning being like, oh my gosh, like I've given all of my money away. I have paid $1,000 for a lesson. I bought all kinds of insurance from some dude that I'm never going to want to talk to ever again. Right? Bing!
Yeah.
Like, all he's concerned about is Rita. Like, he's just like, what can I do for you? And I think that like that is kind of the move toward that dispassion that frees us to become people like Christ, right? To begin to see others as persons that we can love and serve and all of this kind of stuff, to the point where it not only has changed, like, you know, the way that he interacts with Rita, but the very way that he sees Punxsutawney itself, right? Like he can't wait to get out of there in the very beginning. He calls the people Hicks. Mm-hmm. Then eventually what happens is they're his people. And he's like, let's move here, right? Like that's where the movie ends. He's like, let's move here. We'll rent to start.
Yeah, yeah. This place I was trapped is now a place that I voluntarily want to live.
Yeah, where I've been freed.
Yeah, and I think like that's an important point to highlight, right? Like this sense of dispassion or unattachment, and I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind when you think about like how Christians, like we kind of like walk this path, because it's not about like complete unattachment to anything and everyone, right? It's more about cultivating like the right attachments. Like his attachment goes from the money in his pocket and his social standing as the weatherman at the good station, right, to Rita and to his people. Like it's not that Phil has no attachments. It's right. It's that he has love, and he's kind of like in relation now with these people, and in a sense in relation with this place, right? He's not kind of like like this sort of like completely empty vessel that wants nothing and loves nobody, right? I mean, he does want things. He wants good for Rita. He wants good for the people like in his community. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Like, you know, when we talk about emptying ourselves, right, as Christians, and sort of shedding these like false attachments and shedding these whatever sort of superficial attachments, the goal isn't to sort of be an atom floating in the wind, like completely unattached. Like, the goal is to attach yourself in this right way, in this healthy sort of way, with like loving, real, genuine, vulnerable relationships. You know, his hand is open when it comes to the money in his pocket, but his arms sort of like grab Rita in an embrace, you know? And that's kind of the difference. Like his heart has been sort of emptied of the superficial stuff that it used to be attached to, but now it's full of genuine love and genuine compassion. You know, like our goal is not to love, not to love other people, right? Our goal is not to not love the Lord. It's emptiness that leads to this deeper sort of fullness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that like what you're speaking to there is like what I've often heard, right, is kind of this idea of Christian freedom. Like, we think of freedom, I think generally speaking, as Americans, right? Like our freedom to fill in the blank. Like, we're free to express ourselves. We're free to go to church if we want to go to church. We're free to do this. We're free to do that. We're free to do whatever we want. It's a free country. Remember, like as a kid, by the way, when like someone was like staring at somebody, people were like, "Stop staring at me." They'd be like, "It's a free country." That's such a silly thing to say. Like that, because I don't think that's what that's about. But I do remember that.
That's right.
I think it probably even
it's in the Bill of Rights. Not touching you. Not touching
you. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching. So I can't remember where I was going. Oh, freedom. Freedom to do whatever, right? I think that is like what we tend to think of is this kind of, again, like the Phil Connors kind of freedom that he experiences in the very beginning of being stuck in Groundhog Day, right? Like, I can do whatever I want. There's no consequences. I can pursue any passion that I please, and it's my right within this kind of cosmology that I have. But again, really what that ends up being, and I think that what helps us to know is that if we just get to do whatever we want all the time, to follow every whim and will and desire that we have, that's not actually freedom. That's slavery. It's slavery, because then you are now beholden to do whatever you want, whenever you want it. You want chips? You got to eat chips. You want, ice cream? Go eat ice cream. You want to buy a cabin? And I don't know, like, I'm not good at thinking about these kinds of things when the push comes to shove, but like, as a desire strikes, then it's yours, right? And so it's slavery. You're actually enslaved to your own desires and your own will all the time, which again speaks to this like frustration that we were talking about. Because if I can't get what I want, then now I'm frustrated and angry that I can't have what I want, as opposed to like the Christian path, which is the path of obedience, right? Obedience says, I'm going to choose to submit my will to the will of another, and I'm going to obey what this person has put in front of me. And in so doing, what I actually begin to attain to is a different kind of freedom. It's not a freedom to do anything. It's a freedom from my desires, a freedom from my passions, a freedom from my attachments, because I'm no longer just like doing whatever I want whenever I want it. I'm now submitting myself, and I'm choosing a life of freedom under someone else. And when I'm now freed from myself, when I'm freed from doing everything that I want all the time, now I become free to love my neighbor. I'm no longer attached to myself. I'm now freed from the bondage of my own passions, my own sins, my own whatever. And now I'm available. Now I'm out here in the world free to love you because I no longer need to get everything that I want. I no longer am bound by, you know, my desires.
Yeah. And I think we've all had those experiences, right? Like when there are things that you should do, right? There are like good things that you want to do, and yet you don't have the follow through sometimes to do them. It's like, you should say your prayers when you wake up in the morning and you don't, or like, that you should be kind to that person who is bothering you right now, but you don't, right? And that becomes that sort of like the stripping away of the things that hold us back, right? So that we can actually be free to be virtuous. I think for me, the best way that I understand this, it's kind of a fun little story. I remember one time when I was a kid, I tricked my little sister and my cousin, and there was like a little stain in my grandmother's closet. And like I concocted this story about how somebody was murdered in the closet, and that was the blood stain. And I like crept up during the afternoon, and I told them to go into the closet to check it. And when they go inside to this dark closet, I slammed the door behind them and I prop my feet up against the door, and I just hear them howling on the inside. And the moment I slammed the door, I'm like, I should not have done that. And yet for a good like 20 seconds, I sat there with my feet propped against the door, fully knowing that what I was doing was so terrible. Like terrible. They're blood curdling screams from inside this closet, right? Like it's pitch black. I told them that a ghost is in there or whatever it is, right? We're little kids. And it's like something within me is just like, nope, I'm going to keep my feet propped against this. I know I shouldn't. This is Steve, you're terrible. Why are you doing this? Like, nope, just gonna keep doing this. I'm in it now. And so that's kind of my go-to example of thinking about this. Like that dumb instinct is the thing that sort of like strips away, because I knew what I was doing was terrible and callous, and I was scaring the bejesus out of my like sister and cousin. And yet like, I didn't care. And it becomes this freedom to actually love, this freedom to actually care, this freedom to actually like look people in the face and do what is loving and right.
Even just you saying that reminds me of like, in St. Augustine's Confessions, like he talks about like a bunch of different stuff, right? But he talks about like different passions, like the lust of the flesh and like all of these different like things that are kind of like these impulsive, sinful passions, right? That are like kind of in the moment. And he's not really too concerned about those ones. He's just like, yeah, they're bad. Like, I don't want to do that. I mean, that was probably a bad idea, but like for him, there's like one sin in particular that like he still carries into his adulthood from his childhood, that really grieves him. And it's like when he just, for no reason, saw like, I think it was like a pear, like, or something. I can't exactly remember what it was, but there's like a pear tree that he sees, and he just takes a pear just because he wants the pear, not because he's hungry, not because whatever, but because he just wanted to steal it for no reason whatsoever. And like for him, that is the sin that he carried with him, is like, dang dude, I'm really messed up. Like because I took that for no other reason than just because I wanted to. There was no need that I had, no whatever, but it's that like, again, that desire, that attachment to like, I have this impulse and I know that I have no reason to it. Kind of like you were saying here, right? Like I shouldn't do this, but because I like the power that it gives me, or I like the whatever that I feel with it. I'm going to keep
an assertion of me and my will, right?
Yeah. Yep. To be something. And that's really been, I think, like our problem from the very beginning, right? Like as human beings, like we think we know better about like what we should do and who we should be than, I don't know, our God or our consciences or whatever.
Seriously. We're all Phils, right? And we go through that first stage of trying to get what we want, and then that despair of sort of not getting what we want. But then like Phil comes out of this, right? And the thing that brings him out of this is it's Rita in particular, right? Like his life changes for the sake of like the love of this person. And he becomes the sort of man who is like worthy of her love at the end of the day, like this pure human being who, like you said, is just like this kind-hearted, gentle, there's no guile about her. She's just kind of like, there's something really like, vulnerable and kind of real about her. And she is the person who transforms his life. And she's the person who sort of like bounces him out of this despair into like, okay, I'm gonna keep learning like French, not for the sake of like seducing her or anything, but because I can read French poetry to her, because I care about her, and you see like even his initial like sketchy attempts at self-improvement sort of get baptized And it's not just about like learning it to impress her, right? It's like learning it to please her, or learning it to sort of serve her, right? It's for the sake of her happiness, not his gratification. All of these skills that he learned along the way.
Well, I see. It's interesting because like I sort of felt like even to the way that it begins is he's kind of in this place of like, well, what else am I going to do now, right? Like I'm like I'm stuck here for all eternity. I might as well learn to do some good. And there's these moments I think where, because especially like when it comes to, you start seeing where the shift happens when he's starts looking around the community for things that he can do for other people, like saving the kid falling out of the tree or changing the lady's tire or whatever. Like none of that becomes, where are you going, buddy?
I'm listening. I just had to get my charger.
I thought I said something to hurt your feelings or something. You were just like, all of a sudden you're running away. I see. Now it's all about the power. I got the power. But yeah, I see some dance moves. Those are some sweet dance moves up there. Keep it up. I totally forgot what I was saying. Now I'm way thrown off. Instead, I think what I'll do is I'll just, especially because it's just Steve's there. There he is. There.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I threw you off.
I felt so scared and alone. I was so scared and so alone.
I was down to under 20%, and I'm like, this is eating through power way faster than I thought.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're back.
I'm so sorry.
Suddenly I was like in double quarantine.
So sorry. I did not mean to do that.
It's almost a quadruple quarantine.
I was trying to be as like inconspicuous about it as possible, and instead I just ghosted you mid your sentence. I'm sorry.
I don't know how creeping away when you're on video chat is inconspicuous, especially when you're still clearly on the camera.
Fair. Yeah, we normally do this without like the video being enabled. So maybe that's what I was sort of assuming. Like, I'm still listening. You're still in my ears. I was listening to every word. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm just glad you're back. I'm glad you're back.
We're doing it live.
I don't remember what we were saying. Oh, yes. Okay. So, because the impression that I think that I got in the very beginning of this was that like he, felt like it just seemed like he was trying to do it to himself kind of like get better. And like there's some moments where it seems like he was, really moved by certain things himself. Like when he's giving that speech and everyone around him is like putting the microphones up to him.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Chekhov's winter and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is beautiful, right? From the difference between what he says there and when he's in his despair of like, it's going to be cold, it's going to be gray, and it's going to last you for the rest of your life. There is no way that this winter is ever going to end as long as that groundhog keeps seeing his shadow. He has to be stopped.
So he steals the groundhog.
My favorite line in that is when he's like, don't drive angry. Don't drive angry. Oh, man. So good. But I think you're right. It quickly shifts for him into this kind of like, how can this be a thing for others? Like, right? Like, how can my skills in life be for others to the point where he's playing the piano at the final thing. And it's like, he's the one kind of like leading the party, right? Yeah. Because he's the one just like being awesome on the piano. And I love when he says to her, welcome to our party, right? He doesn't say like, welcome to my party, welcome to the net or to the Phil show, welcome to whatever. But he instead says, this is like our party. There's this kind of like communal thing that happens because he now sees that he's, his life is for other people. And I love that that's where the shift happens for him, is when he starts becoming curious about who other people are, what their stories are. I love that scene where he takes her around the cafe. He's like, this is so-and-so, and this is so-and-so, and this is this, and this is that. And he's more concerned just about like who they are. And at one point, Rita asks him if he knows her. And what he says in response is, I know all about you. Which I want, that caught me in a different way, right? To like, is there a difference between like really knowing someone and knowing about them, mm-hmm. right? Like the kind of this experiential knowledge, maybe that we have, versus this kind of academic knowledge. Yeah, and I don't know.
Well, that becomes
from one into the other.
Well, that becomes the way that he initially sort of deals with everybody, right? Like when he goes to Nancy, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. The beautiful woman in the diner that he tries to seduce. Like there's that very kind of awkward, like he sits down and he's like, where'd you go to school? Who was your English teacher? Right. And he's just literally gathering data. And she is just sort of a fungible, like it doesn't matter who she is or anything. He's just learning things about her so that he can use those facts to manipulate her. Right. And that is a thing that, like, admittedly, he was trying to do with Rita for a long period of time. His initial sort of interactions with her were instrumental. I mean, he was trying to seduce her and that was it. But at some point, right, that sort of like learning about became like actually just knowing her. And maybe that's the thing. Like, it's hard to sort of like say where this ends and this begins. I mean, like it's got that sort of gray kind of spectrum, right? But it definitely transforms, and he goes from sort of like knowing about Rita to like knowing and genuinely loving her, and her like in this really beautiful way, sort of genuinely loving him as well, even though like they only sort of spend like a day together in her understanding.
I know. I was thinking about that a lot too. I was like, this is still only the second day that she knows him.
Yes. Admittedly weird. Yes.
So I had wondered about that because he tells her again, that he loves her. And the first time she's like, you don't even know me. And then somehow she buys it this time. And I guess I don't know.
Yeah. Did she have access to some of these, is the divine puppeteer giving her some access to these experiences? Right. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something is going on behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, I don't know, man. I love this movie. I think the ultimate thing kind of, for us in all of it, right, is like, I guess what I'm thinking about through this and what this brought up for me is as we're kind of in this like kind of Groundhog Day experience ourselves. I don't know, like I'm just trying to figure out like how can I see this as an opportunity? There's no sense of knowing when this is really going to end. Who knows? I mean, really, honestly, who knows anything? Who knows what tomorrow holds? This whole situation changes so quickly that it's like, I don't know. But I guess, can I use this time of quarantine, of whatever, to like really work on growing in virtue? Because there really isn't anything else to do. Like everything has been stripped away.
Fair.
Right? I can't even spend time like grilling meat. Like everything has been stripped away. Right. Normally it'd be like, dude, we're home. I'd probably be making brisket like once a week, smoking a huge once a week. And it's almost like the Lord has just been like, nope, nothing.
And that's a shame because you make excellent brisket.
I do make a really good brisket, don't I? Really,
yeah, but maybe that's the challenge, right? And you said before there was something providential about this happening during Lent, right? Like we have to one of the challenges is to sort of choose our Puxatani.
Yep.
Not be trapped here sort of against our will, but to actually say yes to it.
Yep.
Yep. And to
my Puxatani is this particular house.
Yes.
What's your Puxatani?
We'll start by renting.
Exactly. Well, I think that's all that's on my mind about this. You got any final thoughts?
No, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I watched it again. Like this was a nice sort of spur, especially at this particular time. It's cool to do this so differently, right? Like I think it's fun also just to do pop culture with, some friends in the chat. We've got about 10 minutes before we sort of say goodbye. So if you want to just pop a question or a comment in the chat, we'll read them out. Feel free to add your name, where you're from, if you want to say hi. We've got a couple of minutes. If not, that's okay. And we'll just sort of we'll end up because this has been good. Yeah. I got nothing else.
Instead of sitting here awkwardly staring at each other, I'll tell some jokes. So what do you call a cow with 3 legs?
I'm pretty sure we did this in a previous episode. Do it anyway.
Tri-tip. Yuck.
I'm curious. Is it the discussion of brisket that is now
I'm so
up these
hungry.
Cow jokes?
I'm so hungry. I feel like I haven't eaten for forever. Ooh,
great question by Monica.
Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, sorry. So Monica from Virginia. Hi, Monica. Her question is, what will you be doing next? So we can do our homework. So we are going to be doing this every week. Every week we're going to be live at 12:30 Eastern here at this link, y2m.org/popculturelive. We're also going to have the recorded podcast in the feed in case you miss us live. Don't worry. Next week are we doing Billy on the Street next week?
Billy on the Street. Yep. The opposite of social distancing.
Yes. So Billy on the Street, again, sort of like can be a little crude, can be a little silly, but it's fun, it's frantic. And yeah, I think it's very in your face. It's this guy Billy Eichner running around the streets of New York City, doing kind of a weird parody of pop culture. And it's, again, very in your face. So there's that. Next week, Billy on the Street. Let's see.
So Nathaniel Zadari from Colorado. Well, you guys ever did an episode about the Office TV show? I think we actually have done one, haven't we?
We did. I don't remember what number it is off the top of my head. I think it was 100 something ish, give or take.
Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah. So Christian, take a look at that. And then we have a question from Monica. Steve, my son wants to know if you remember the whoopee cushion that blew up from the St. Amelia conference. He has it here and you signed it. Yeah, so that was the St. Amelia homeschooling conference last April. This year's conference got canceled, of course, unfortunately. I was looking forward to being there, but it didn't work. I totally remember. I think it's very funny that he still has it. That's awesome. Did you find, Christian, did you find the Office episode?
Oh gosh, I'm trying. So
just so you know, the archived episodes are available on ancientfaith.com. You can find them on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get podcasts. So if you go and subscribe and scroll back to, again, I think it's episode 100 something. I can't remember exactly.
We're going to figure it out.
Father Jesse, he's got the real question. If Phil Connors was Orthodox, would the movie be called Feast of the Presentation? I enjoy that.
Probably.
He's trapped in this slice of the kingdom day after day. Like he's just got to go to liturgy every morning. It would be a very different movie.
It's episode 71.
What? 71?
Yep.
Okay, Nathaniel, you're gonna have to scroll back a little ways, but we did the Office. Yeah, episode 71.
October 3rd, 2018.
What?
There you go.
Yeah, this is gonna be episode 122. We've been at this for a while.
It's true.
We've got a message from Anita. Thanks, guys, gals. Due to your podcast, every once in a while, I can surprise my 20 and 30-something children with my excellent knowledge. Anita from Colorado Spins. Yes. Say hi to your mom, Nathaniel. That's awesome.
This is great. This is fun.
Thank you, Anita.
So when is the drop date for this to the public, says Monica? Our young adults listen to your podcast sometimes for our meeting discussion and would love to do a virtual meeting with our group on this. This should come out next Wednesday?
I think so, in the feed. So I think what I want to do is, because we're recording this just in case with us on video, we might put this on YouTube as well, just because this is being videoed. The audio is not going to be as good, I think, just because of the way that like Zoom records it. So there will be cleaner audio in the normal podcast feed, and that'll be out, a week from today. So the new episodes come out on the feed every Wednesday. It'll be a week from today. So we'll record live one Wednesday, and the following Wednesday, like the good clean audio will come out.
And if you have your young adult group, be kind of, I don't know if they're available. Eastern,
bring them in.
Yeah, Pacific 9:30.
Yeah, bring them in if possible. I know today is weird, especially for folks on the West Coast because of liturgy and stuff, because it's the Annunciation, which we didn't realize when we sort of scheduled it for this time East Coast. But hopefully going forward, it'll be a little bit easier for our friends on the West Coast. We've got a question from Courtney. Courtney from Waco, Texas, sort of a more serious question. I've seen a lot of people recently trying to analyze this virus as a sort of, quote, sign from God to teach or tell us something. To what extent is it useful to do this and treat it as a divine intervention versus letting a virus just be a virus without meaning or greater significance? That's a great question.
That's a great question.
I have a thought. I think like there's no easy answers to this. And I think kind of like what I would offer is that our response kind of is in the tension between two things. On the one hand, like I don't think that we would have kind of a what's more of a sort of Calvinist cosmology, you might say, that like nothing happens without God's like explicit, like he is the cause of this. Like if a baby gets cancer, he is the cause. If a virus goes around, he is the cause. I'm not sure that we would say that like he is kind of like explicitly like behind everything that happens. Like there is a certain brokenness in the world, you know? So there's that kind of pole. And the other pole, I think, is sometimes our response, right? And the spiritual posture that we have to things is what's really important in terms of like our own sort of struggle for holiness. And this is where it's like the difference between feeling stuck, like choosing to sort of not feel stuck in the moment, but to kind of accept the cell in which we've contained, right? Like monks have their cell, and that's where their sort of spiritual battlefield is, in a way that we all kind of have ourselves now. And this is where our spiritual battlefield is. So not like necessarily like reading something providential into it, but kind of like baptizing it and using it for the sake of our spiritual edification. Like if this is a time when you are surrounded with quiet because you're in an empty space, it becomes a time to double down on like quiet and stillness and actually sort of unpack what's in your heart and give space for, you know, hearing the still small voice of God, which comes to us in silence. If you find yourself in a cell that is a little bit noisier, it's about not being resentful of that noise, but seeing that noise as again, a condition of our salvation. So I think kind of like it's sort of operating within those two poles. Maybe that's what I would offer. What do you think, Christian?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I've seen a lot of kind of stuff on this all over the place, right? Like I've seen people say that it's from the devil because the devil doesn't want us to go to church. I've seen people say that it's from God because we're so bad and we need to be whatever. I've seen all that kind of stuff. And I think the reality is that like to say that the virus is just a virus, maybe what I think that does introduce is kind of a dualistic way of thinking about the world. That somehow that there isn't a kind of like spiritual dynamic to whatever might be happening kind of on the physical level. And so while I don't necessarily think that like, you know, maybe that like God wants to kill people with a virus because he's so mad at them, I do think that we would be missing a real opportunity if we didn't somehow have in mind that whatever else might be going on, that the virus and the quarantine has been that this situation that we have, I'll call it that, I'll say it that way, is a gift from God. And it is a gift to us for our salvation and for our sanctification. I think kind of in the way that I was saying too, that like with each of us being stuck in our homes, I don't think this is a tribulation, that somehow we're being like persecuted by the world or anything like that. I tend to think of this more as a time of like, this is where God is helping us through this thing, confront things in each of us that pull us away from him, that have no space for loving other people. And so I do think that there is something to this if we treat it as a gift from God rather than as like, you know, maybe punishment or something like that. So I think that if we can receive everything that comes to us as a gift, like that the Lord has something for each of us in this, then I think that helps us kind of maintain a heart of Eucharistic living, much in the same way, right, that God did not create death. Like he just simply didn't create death, but he used it to bring forth victory, trampling down death by death. And I think too, probably in this, that the virus, even though God, you know, doesn't want to kill people, I don't think he's unafraid to use our mortality to somehow bring us to sanctification and to salvation, because he's a good and merciful God. I don't think that he's mad at us and that's why he's given us this, but I don't know God's inner mind. So that's my thought.
But we do have control over our response.
Yes. And I think that's what I was saying earlier with like the posture with which we take this is like, how dare they close our churches and da. And like, if we find ourselves being like, how dare they ever, like, then that's, I think, revealing something in our hearts. Because again, when you look at Jesus as he goes to the cross, do we ever see him go, how dare you hit me? Who do you think you are? You know, never ever once does he do that, but he endures with silence and patience and love. And I think that is probably the call for us here, is how do we endure with patience, silence, and love?
Totally. I think that is a good last word on which we can end. Beautifully said, Christian. Always a pleasure.
Yep.
Thanks everybody for hanging out. And we will see you next week, 12:30 Eastern. This will be up on YouTube most likely. The clean audio will be up in the podcast feed next Wednesday. Next time, Billy on the Street. Very silly, very slapstick, very different. And that's it. Thanks, Christian. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you. See you next week.
God bless, guys.